I spent 23 years thinking I was a lucky man. Good job, healthy kids, a house I built most of with my own two hands, and a best friend named Derek who had been in my corner since the 7th grade. That's the part that still hits me when I wake up at 3 in the morning. Not my wife. Derek, let me back up. My name is not important, but the people in this story are. My wife, I'll call her Diane. My best friend of 22 years, Derek. My sister Carol, who is the reason I'm still standing. And a woman named Patricia who walked into my life through the worst door imaginable and somehow became everything. Diane and I met at a company cookout when I was 31. She was funny, sharp, easy to talk to. We dated for 2 years, got married, had our son Marcus and our daughter Lily. On paper, it looked like the life you're supposed to want. For a long time, I believed that paper. Derek was my best man at the wedding. He gave a toast that made everyone cry, including me. He talked about how I had always been the kind of man who showed up, who kept his word, who deserved good things. I have thought about that toast many times since everything fell apart. The two of them knew each other through me, obviously. Derek came to our barbecues, our kids' birthday parties. His own marriage had ended 6 years ago. No kids, no drama. Just two people who grew in opposite directions. After his divorce, he leaned on me a lot. Diane was kind to him. Welcoming. I thought that was one of the things I loved about her. Looking back, I was reading the wrong story. It started with small things I explained away. Derek coming over when I was working late, and Diane mentioning it casually the next morning over coffee. The two of them texting during family dinners. I saw her phone screen once. Just a glance, nothing explicit, just his name appearing too often. I told myself I was being paranoid. Derek was my brother in every way that mattered. Diane was my wife. Some things you don't let yourself think. About 8 months before everything collapsed, I started picking up extra shifts. Our daughter Lily needed braces, the water heater had died, and I had promised Marcus a trip to see his grandparents in Oregon that summer. Money was tight, the way it gets when you're doing everything right, and life still costs more than you expected. I was gone more. I was tired more. I noticed Diane and I were talking less, but I chalked it up to the season we were in. Every marriage has seasons. Derek was around more during that stretch. He said he was going through something, feeling lost without a family of his own. I encouraged it. I told Diane to be patient with him, that he just needed good people around him. She nodded and said, of course. I was building the cage and handing them the key. The day it all came apart was a Thursday in October. I had been scheduled to work until 7, but my supervisor sent half the crew home early because of a parts delay. I didn't call ahead. I was tired and a little relieved, and I just drove home, looking forward to leftovers and an hour of quiet before bed. Derek's truck was in my driveway. I didn't think anything of it at first. Genuinely. That's how deep the trust ran. I walked in through the side door, set my keys on the counter, and called out. No answer. The television was on in the living room, but nobody was there. I walked down the hall. I don't need to describe what I saw when I opened the bedroom door. You already know. What I will tell you is that the image burned itself into the back of my skull and has never fully left. My wife. My best friend. In the room where I slept every night. Derek saw me first. He said my name. Just my name. Flat. Like a statement. Diane screamed and grabbed the sheet. She said, "It's not," and then stopped because there was nothing to finish that sentence with. I stood there for what felt like a long time, but was probably 4 seconds. Then I turned around and walked back to the kitchen. I heard them scrambling behind me. I picked up my keys. I walked back out the side door. I sat in my truck in the driveway for 11 minutes. I remember looking at the clock twice, and then I drove to my sister Carol's house. Carol took one look at my face and pulled me inside without asking a single question. She poured 2 glasses of bourbon and waited. When I told her, she didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." I slept on Carol's couch that night. She called in late to work the next morning and sat with me while I figured out my next move. I didn't call Diane. I didn't call Derek. I had nothing to say to either of them that wouldn't make things worse. Diane called me 11 times before noon. I let them all go to voicemail. The messages started defensive. The first one said it wasn't what it looked like, which told me everything about where her head was. The third one shifted to explaining. They had been in pain. It had been going on for 4 months. She hadn't known how to tell me. The 7th one was tearful, asking me to come home so we could talk. The 11th one was quiet, and she just said she was sorry. 4 months. While I was working extra shifts to pay for our daughter's braces, Derek called once. I didn't listen to that voicemail for 3 weeks. When I finally did, he said he had been a coward, that he had no excuse, that he would spend the rest of his life being sorry. He said he loved me like a brother and that he had destroyed something that couldn't be replaced. Then he hung up. I deleted it. I retained a divorce attorney the following Monday. Her name was drawn from a referral, a woman named Sandra who had a quiet office downtown and who looked at me with this specific kind of tired sympathy that told me she had heard this story many times. She was efficient and fair, and I was grateful for both. When I told Diane I had spoken to a lawyer, something shifted in her. She stopped asking me to come home and started asking me to wait. She said she had ended things with Derek, that it was over, that it had been a mistake from beginning to end. She said our kids needed their father in the house. She said she would do anything. I told her the thing I kept coming back to wasn't the act itself. It was the months of lying, the dinners and the bedtimes and the Sunday mornings while she looked me in the eye and let me believe we were fine. You can't unfake that many mornings, she cried. I don't think she was performing. I think she genuinely hadn't thought all the way through what she was building. But understanding why someone hurts you doesn't obligate you to absorb it. We told Marcus and Lily together, sitting at the kitchen table I had built from a kit the year Marcus was born. Lily was 12. Marcus was 15. They asked if it was their fault, which is the question every kid asks, and the question that rips you clean in half. We told them no, and meant it, and I meant it for both of us, because whatever Diane had done, she was still their mother, and I was not going to poison that. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment 6 minutes from the house. Close enough to be present, far enough to breathe. Marcus and Lily were with me every Wednesday night and every other weekend, and I showed up to every school event, every game, every concert, regardless of whose week it technically was. Derek, I didn't see or speak to for 7 months. Our mutual friends fractured the way they do. Some chose sides. Some tried to stay in the middle and found out quickly there was no comfortable ground there. A handful of people I had known for 15 years quietly disappeared from my life, and I let them go without a fight because I had other things to spend my energy on. The divorce was finalized 9 months after that Thursday in October. On the day I signed the final papers, I drove to a bar I had never been to, sat at the end counter, and ordered a beer I didn't particularly want. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't mourning. I was just sitting somewhere neutral while I figured out what came after. A woman sat down 2 stools away. She ordered coffee, which I thought was an odd choice for a bar at 6 in the evening, when I said so out loud. I don't know why. I'm not generally that forward. She smiled and said she had a deposition at 8 in the morning, and she was here for the quiet, not the alcohol. Her name was Patricia. She was an attorney, not the divorce kind, the kind who defended people the system had given up on. She had dark eyes and a way of listening that made you feel like she was actually tracking every word instead of waiting for her turn to speak. We talked for an hour and a half, not about my situation. I didn't unload any of that on a stranger. We talked about her work, about the neighborhood the bar was in, about a documentary we had both watched and formed opposite opinions about. When she got up to leave, she said it had been a genuinely good hour and a half. I said I thought so too. She hesitated at the door. Then she turned back and put her card in the bar in front of me and said if I ever wanted to argue about another documentary, she was open to it. I looked at that card for a week before I called. Our first dinner was awkward in the way that first dinners are when both people have enough history to be careful. She had been through her own version of loss, a long engagement that ended when she found out her fiancé had a second life she hadn't been invited into. She didn't go into detail and I didn't push. We had more in common than 2 strangers should. The second dinner was easier. The third one, she laughed at something I said and I felt something shift in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Not infatuation. Something quieter and more reliable than that. Recognition, maybe. I told her about Diane and Derek on the 4th dinner. All of it, not the edited version. She listened without reacting the way people sometimes do, with the sharp intake of breath and the wide eyes that make you feel like a spectacle. She just listened, and then she asked 2 questions, both about my kids, not about Diane or Derek. And that told me more about her than an hour of explaining herself could have. We had been seeing each other for about 3 months when I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up. When I did, it was Marcus, calling from a friend's phone because his was dead. "Dad," he said, "you need to come to the school. Lily fell during practice and she's okay, but she's asking for you." I was there in 8 minutes. Diane arrived about 20 minutes later. We sat in the same waiting area outside the nurse's office without speaking for a while. Lily had twisted her ankle. Not serious, but painful and scary when you're 12, and it happens in front of your whole team. We could hear her voice through the door, talking to the nurse. Eventually, Diane said quietly, "How are you doing?" "Actually." I said I was doing better than I expected. She nodded. She looked tired in a way that was different from the tired I remembered. She said she and Marcus had been talking, that he had told her I seemed like myself again. She said she was glad. I didn't have anything to add to that, so I didn't. Lily came out on crutches, saw us both, and smiled the relieved smile of a kid who still wanted her whole family in the same room even when they couldn't be, and I focused on that smile and let everything else sit where it was. That evening, after I had dropped Lily home and was driving back to my apartment, my phone buzzed. It was a text or a number I didn't have saved, and the first 3 words stopped me at a red light. "You should know." I pulled over. It was a woman named Greta who had worked with Derek for 2 years. She said she had found my number through a mutual contact and had been going back and forth about whether to reach out. She said Derek had started dating someone from their office 6 weeks ago. She said the woman he was dating had mentioned, in passing, that she hadn't known about me or Diane until recently, and that when she found out the full story she had been furious but was choosing to stay. Then Greta said the part that made my hands go cold. She said the woman Derek was dating was also a close friend of Diane's. I sat on the side of that road for a long time. I thought about calling Diane. I thought about calling Carol. I thought about all the ways I could respond to this information and what each of them would cost me. And then I thought about the last 9 months. The apartment, the dinners with Marcus and Lily, the long drive through rebuilding something from wreckage, and I made a decision. I saved Greta's number. I texted back 2 words, "Thank you," and I let Diane find out on her own. She did 6 weeks later, through the normal machinery of social circles colliding. I heard about it from Marcus, who heard it from Lily, who heard it from Diane herself in what sounded like a long and painful kitchen conversation. Marcus called me that night, not for information, just to check in. He said his mom was upset. I asked if he was okay. He said yeah, mostly. He said, "Dad, do people ever actually learn?" I told him some do and some don't, and the best you can do is make sure you're one of the ones who does. He was quiet for a second, and then he said, "You and Patricia are still going out, right?" I laughed. I said yes. He said, "Good." Patricia met Marcus and Lily about 5 months in, at a low-pressure Sunday lunch that Carol had the wisdom to host so it was on neutral ground with other people around. Lily took to her immediately in the way kids do when an adult kneels to their level without making it a performance. Marcus was more measured, the way 15-year-old boys are. But by the time we were clearing plates, he was telling her about a book he was reading and she was asking real questions and I could see him recalibrating in real time. On the drive home, Lily said, from the back seat, "She's not trying to be our mom." I said that was right. Lily said, "I like that." That was the moment I knew things were going to be okay. Not perfect. Not the life I had drawn up in my head at 31, but okay in the real sense. Sturdy, honest, built on something that could hold weight. Patricia and I got engaged on a Tuesday, which is not a romantic day and was entirely unplanned. We were making dinner at my apartment and she was frustrated with the case and I was listening, and somewhere in the middle of it I looked at her standing in my kitchen with flour on her sleeve from a recipe she had decided to try from scratch. And I thought, I want this exact thing for the rest of my life. I said it out loud before I had thought it all the way through. I said, "I want to marry you." She stopped. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I want that too." And then she turned back to the counter and kept cooking. And I stood there smiling like an idiot, and that was our engagement. Marcus and Lily were the second and third people we told, before parents, before Carol, before anyone. That felt right. We were married the following spring. Small ceremony, 31 people total, in a garden venue that Patricia had seen once on a walk and never forgotten. Marcus served as my best man. He gave a short toast. He is his father's son and not a man of many public words. But the last line of it stayed with the room for a while. He said, "My dad taught me that trust is built slowly and broken fast. He also taught me, recently, that it can be rebuilt, just not always with the same person." Lily cried. Carol cried. I did too, though I held it together through the vows by looking at Patricia's face and nothing else. Derek and I have not spoken. I don't carry it as a wound anymore. But I don't pretend it isn't a scar. 22 years of friendship ended in a bedroom hallway. And some things you can understand without being willing to forgive. I understand he was lonely. I understand he made the worst choice available to him. I don't hate him. I just don't have room for him anymore. And that's not anger, it's just the truth of what's left after something breaks that big. Diane and I are decent to each other for the sake of the kids, which is what adults are supposed to do and what not enough of them manage. She is in a different relationship now, someone I have never met and do not need to. Marcus and Lily seem okay with it, and that's what matters. About 8 months after Patricia and I got married, she told me she was pregnant. We were sitting on the back porch in the early evening, the same way we had spent 100 evenings by then. She handed me the test without preamble, the way she does most things. Directly and without drama. I looked at it for a long time. I thought about 31-year-old me at that company cookout, thinking he knew what a good life looked like. I thought about Derek's truck in my driveway and sitting in my truck for 11 minutes and driving to Carol's house with nothing. I thought about the bar and the coffee and the card left on the counter. I thought about how you can't see the road when you're in the middle of the worst stretch of it. I looked up at Patricia and she was watching me with those steady eyes and I said, "We're going to need a bigger apartment." She laughed, the real one, the one that reaches her whole face. And I thought, I am a lucky man. Not the way I used to think that. In a way that costs something to get to. The kind of lucky that knows exactly what it's worth. A year out from where we are now, Patricia and I have a daughter named Rose. She is 8 months old and currently conducting serious research into whether every object in the house can be put in her mouth. Marcus is 17, taller than me, and has his mother's sharpness and, if I am allowed to say it, my instinct for knowing who to trust. Lily is 14, plays soccer like she's trying to settle a personal grudge with gravity, and has appointed herself Rose's unofficial chief of security. I coach Marcus's baseball team on Saturdays. I have dinner with Carol every other week. I go to work and come home and sit on the back porch with my wife. And I do not take a single one of those things for granted. If you ask me what I would tell someone in the middle of it, sitting in their truck in their own driveway, the whole structure of their life turned to something unrecognizable. I would say this. The people who were supposed to be there and weren't will reveal themselves completely. Let them. The people who show up without being asked will also reveal themselves. Pay attention to those ones. Don't poison the kids. Don't disappear from the kids. Don't make the kids carry messages or choose sides or perform stability they don't feel. And understand that what comes after the worst thing is not always a lesser version of what you had before. Sometimes it is something you didn't have the imagination to ask for, because you were busy protecting something that was already gone. I didn't plan any of this. I planned none of it. But I am sitting in a house with a woman who tells me the truth, 2 teenagers who still voluntarily call me, and a baby who this morning grabbed my nose with both hands and looked at me like I was the most interesting discovery of her entire life. That's not the life I drew up. It's better. I have thought a lot about what actually causes a life to fall apart. Most people want to point at the moment, the truck in the driveway, the open door, the face you never expected to see in that room. But the moment is never really the beginning. The beginning is quieter. It's every small choice that got buried under convenience and comfort, every warning that got explained away because the truth was too expensive to look at directly. Derek didn't become someone capable of that betrayal overnight. And if I'm being honest with myself, the version of my marriage that ended on that Thursday in October had been ending for longer than I knew how to admit. That doesn't excuse anything. It just means the consequences don't appear out of nowhere. They're assembled piece by piece from choices that felt small at the time. What I learned, not from being wise, but from being forced to sit with the wreckage, is that integrity isn't what you do when people are watching. It's what you do at 3 a.m. when nobody would ever know the difference. Derek knew that. He made his choice in the dark over and over for 4 months while shaking my hand and sitting at my table. That kind of slow, deliberate dishonesty hollows a person out from the inside, and no amount of apology can fill what it removes. I didn't take revenge in the dramatic sense. I didn't go back and burn anything down. What I did was something harder and, I think, more complete. I built something real while they stayed tangled in what they had broken. That is the quietest and most devastating thing a person can do after betrayal. Simply refuse to be diminished by it. The courage it takes to start over at 40-something, with 2 kids watching your every move and a heart that doesn't fully trust its own judgment anymore? That's not glamorous. Nobody makes a highlight reel of the Wednesday nights you eat cereal alone in a 2-bedroom apartment and wonder if you made the right call. But that endurance, that willingness to keep showing up in the dark before anything gets better, is what builds the kind of person who deserves what comes next. Patricia didn't fix me. I want to be clear about that. She met a version of me that had already done the hard work of refusing to become bitter. The life we have now wasn't handed to us. It was constructed, slowly, from honesty and patience and the decision, made daily, not once, to choose the harder right thing over the easier, dishonest one. Marcus asked me once if people ever actually learn. I told him some do and some don't. What I didn't say, because he was 15 and I didn't want it to sound like a lecture, is that the ones who learn are usually the ones who stop outsourcing their self-respect, who stop needing the other person to suffer in order to feel whole again, who understand that the life waiting on the other side of the worst thing isn't a consolation prize. It's the real one. The one that required everything you had to reach. I am not the same man who drove to Carol's house with nothing. I am better. Not because the bad thing happened, but because of every choice I made in the days and months after it, when nobody was watching and it would have been so much easier to collapse. That is the only revenge worth taking. Become someone the betrayal couldn't finish.